and welcome to Australia in Space TV. My name is Chris Cubbage. I'm the Executive Editor with My Security Media. Today we're going to be joined by Jason Held, the Chief Executive Officer with Saber Astronautics here in Sydney. And without further ado, Jason, thanks for joining us.
Hello, thank you. Good to be here.
Great. And I was at your Wolfpack event in, June. Was it earlier this June or just only a few weeks ago, which went very, very well. And then we've sort of organised this interview from that as well. So most in the Australian space sector should or will know you, Jason. But yeah, maybe let's talk us through Saber Astronautics, because you've got a range of different partners and activities underway. And as the audience would have seen, the title, which is off your website, is Let's Go to Space, and you're a global operations provider. So maybe just a bit about your background, and then let's dive into Saber.
Okay, no dramas. Like me personally, you might detect a bit of an American accent left over. I've been living in Australia for about 18 years now. I was looking, can't believe I've been here that long. But my background was I was a space engineer working on Hubble and ISS on the development side. I actually was a flight software engineer for Wide Field Camera 3, which is up. So always excited to see some photos come in and things like that. Was also in the military as part of Space Command and in the U.S. before they became Space Force. Did a short stint as an acquisitions officer for a while, but mostly stayed on the technical and operational side. Came to Australia back in 2004 for a master's, stayed around for the PhD, and got a wife.
Got it.
So that's
and you finished your PhD, I'm taking it?
Was that?
Did you finish your PhD?
Yeah, I finished the PhD, didn't finish with the wife. You know, we're still going with her, you know.
Oh,
so,
well, I'm sorry I don't have a doctor there, but some people don't pick it up, but noted. So very good. What was your PhD in, out of interest?
Yeah, that was in, so I did, the thesis was on modeling complex systems of systems. So it was one of the earlier machine learning PhDs applied to modeling lots of things which move around together. But that was actually part of the story for Saber Astronautics, because, you know, right after graduation, I founded Saber. And my wife and I had this big debate, you know, do we found this thing in America, or do we stay here in Australia? Because she was a pharmaceutical graduate, so I met her at Sydney Uni. You got the nerd campus where I was at, you got the cool side of campus where she was at, in the middle. You know, we decided to stay here and build Saber here and take the challenge, and that way she could have her pharmaceutical job and I could have my career and kind of continued on. And it's just a life decision.
Did you see the opportunity here in the Australian space sector? Did you have to sort of look around and sort of do that sort of business planning, or did you see immediate opportunities here given the size of the sector?
Yeah, I mean, the size of the sector at the time was about 3 billion to 4 billion a year, but that's a bit of a Jedi mind trick, because when I looked into it, as well, we're really just buying tech from the United States, and we had these tax concessions that made it easier than building it ourselves. And you had a lot of kind of anti-local lobbying going around from the primes saying, don't build it yourself, just buy our stuff. Not just primes, I can't blame them all the time, but even American startups will come to Australia, picking up some of that cash. So, you know, my thought was like, all right, it's got to be designed for export right away. So we formed Saber Astronautics in Colorado at the same time. Our company structure is one does not own the other; they're separate companies. And that was so that the American company is a veteran-owned U.S. small business. We can chase American dollars. And the Australian company is an Australian business, and we chase Australian contracts and cross the pond where legally allowed. You know, that's kind of how we set it up. And we didn't make a lot of money in the first couple of years. We just did a lot of R&D. I kind of treated it like my postdoc, actually.
Yes. Well, that's fair enough. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, look, like geared towards business, though, making products and getting those products ready, at least to the point where you could get some early sales and things like that.
And so how's this sort of started? I'm thinking we could end up where Saber is now and sort of look backwards, but I think there's enough of a story here just on where Saber is now. And I was impressed with the panel that you put together at the Wolfpack event as well, in terms of the sort of the cross sector that you cover already, from sort of spacesuits through to sort of Earth observation and potentially even sort of what was the other one with the propeller in terms of returning back to Earth.
Yep,
so you've got a really broad range there. Maybe talk us through where you're at now, because I think it might explain some of the journey that you've been on.
Yeah, all right. So skipping ahead, so we've been in business now for 15 years almost. We're about to have our 15th year anniversary coming up, which is exciting.
Nice.
But Saber, as an operations company, we've got mission control centers in Australia and Colorado, and about 50 employees. And we service customers such as Australian defense and U.S. defense on the space side of things. So very focused on space operations. But we also have commercial clients as well, that range from the Hubble CubeSat up to 2-ton companies that are floating on the New York Stock Exchange, things like that. In Australia, you got the Wolfpack Space Hub, which is a spin out from Saber Astronautics. We got a couple of spin outs from Saber that we've done over the years. Wolfpack is one that we're really excited about, just because it's one of the most kind of progressive, open, collaborative things we've ever done. We've been able to do it without any real serious competitive angst that we get in Australia. Everyone's kind of poking each other in the eye a little bit. This is kind of our playground to keep things really, really collaborative, and help out a bunch of companies that because we went through a lot of pain when we founded Saber. There was no support at the time. It's so different now, and so the companies in the Wolfpack, we just finished our first kind of cohort, if you want to call it a cohort, and we're starting our next one. But very broad. But from a space perspective, it's very focused on things that fly and space companies. Kind of a counter story from what you hear from other incubators, which allow space in the door, but also have to service fintech and clean tech and
right.
really, really broad. And we want to say, okay, you're space companies now. The moment you walk in this door, there's no question that you're a space company, not anything else. So,
do you find that that's a challenge with some of the technology, or sort of maintaining that focus, given space can sort of fall into advanced manufacturing and sort of other fields, and the application of space technology does have relevance in other domains? Or do you find that they are, there's enough room there for them? And I also noticed that you've almost following the similar model that your career has followed, where you've got a number of PhD students, and some of these companies and startups are coming out of PhD research.
It's a good point too. Is a lot of academic research in Australia that's just underutilized for commerce. And that was one of the goals. Is all right, top 10 in the world for academic research, number of papers, if you measure on these metrics, but dead last in terms of commercialization. I think it's Pakistan is 39 and Australia is 40. I think to give you some context. But I think that's starting to change. I think the space agency is doing a good job on kind of adding to the ecosystem and corralling the ecosystem. But I got no problems for any of these companies to sell their products cross market, right? As long as their main goal is space. In fact, some of the growth strategies for a lot of them is, we're making a spacesuit for, like, the Metacosmos is the one company making a spacesuit that you mentioned, and there are some parts of that suit that would work really, really well in defense ecosystems and other fields. So we encourage that, but what we wanted to do is differentiate from data plays, because for many years in Australia, people would say, hey, we're selling this Earth observation data, we're selling this communications data, we're a space company now. I said, no, you're not. You're merely a customer channel for other space companies. And I used to tease the government with this. I used to show up and put my best George W. Bush voice on. I can't do Trump. I won't do Trump. Thank you on behalf of the U.S. for your generous contribution to us. Just trying to move the needle a little bit, but that's kind of why we did that.
And you're also doing services as well. Where do you find that you are, or are you contract driven? And the other thing I think with that we've seen in the industry is getting away from government funding and finding customers. It sounds like you've already got some customers already. Are you finding that swinging and the sort of the mix between the product and development, and then also the services side?
Saber's about half and half, half government, half commercial. Well, we got to realize you got people when they talk business, they usually talk business to consumer, which is a part of the problem that VCs in Australia struggle with a little bit, because they're so used to like, and web is very consumer based, and the rules for web are well understood, well established, and quite comfortable. To be frank, you can make a lot of money with it. But a business to business is certainly a play, and we're very much a B2B and B2G, business to government. So government as a customer. And oh, by the way, I was on the design team for the space agency before they founded, on that expert reference group. And one of the things that we talked about was how do we kind of reconcile government as a customer? And the counter argument was like, well, government's already a customer. Remember, at the time, it was $4 billion market importing from the United States. That tells you right away that the government has a $4 billion need for space products. So we might as well make companies that are producing here that the government can buy from. And then the challenge is, how do we get this community of small business powerful enough, capable and competent enough to build that trust in government so that they can use their local supply channel like we know they want to. That's the challenge.
And I take it you still need to work with the primes as well. Where do you see the gap between the startup community here in the space sector, in the Australian space sector, and where the prime's at, and the level of support that you're seeing, not just from government, but from sort of the multinationals?
Yeah, I say, the goal is to have a robust, well-rounded ecosystem. So the story before, and I used to fight very heavily against lobbying from the primes. I was mainly the guy standing up right after them saying, no, this is wrong. Here's how you need to do it. And caught a lot of flack for it. But the truth is, this landscape has changed. So a healthy ecosystem is going to have some primes that could do the multi-billion-dollar missions. But those primes need to be able to rely on tier 2 and tier 3 suppliers. Tier 3 would be I make a widget. Tier 2 would be like Saber. We're now a tier 2 supplier to a lot of primes. And I like the fact that the primes have now opened themselves up to Australian subcontractors in ways that there's still movement to go, because they're so used to just pulling money from Australia in the past. There's a bit of tension there for them. And also Australian acquisition managers are only now starting to open that up as well. And any prime that says, you know what, if we have a balanced mix in our proposals, are finding themselves to be much more successful. And that's what we wanted to see. That's the relationship we want to have. But to be clear, though, I think there's room for Australian primes, maybe 2 or 3 of them.
Okay. And the other one I had in mind was the way you run your business in Australia and the US. Do you run it as one, or do you find that they are separating, or they're separate because the market or the industry's so different, or do you use it as a collaboration point in terms of a head office there and a head office here?
Yeah, they're treated as 2 separate companies. Each has a head office. We collaborate on marketing and sales, so we have joint customers. Each does their own product development. So in the US, we have a space operations and a tool called Space Cockpit. The origin of that product is based on our Australian version called the Predictive Ground Station Interface, which is affectionately called Piggy, because we got tired of Greek god names in our spaceflight software. But see, like I said, some cases we could cross the pond, some cases we can't. They are separate companies legally. They're separate companies in practice. But and I'm constantly finding ways to get them to work closer together. My goal is to get them to work together operationally while keeping them separate legal entities.
It does provide a lot of opportunity, though, for the startups here in Australia to have an instant, almost a landing pad there in Colorado, right?
Yeah, actually, that's a good point. So the Wolfpack Space Hub was used by the New South Wales government for the Going Global program. Right. So we were shuffling companies and helping them out get customers in Colorado. And just because Saber it's got such a good brand in Colorado, the U.S. military knows us really, really well. We're deployed already to the U.S. military. They called us up not too long ago and asked us to be their implementation partner for their new Catalyst Campus International Consortium, which actually the application's closed tomorrow. So if any of your listeners are on this call,
I'll try and get it today, mate.
oh no, well, we've been calling people, letting them know about it. But the whole point is, how do we? The U.S. military is very interesting. They're not competing with Australia at all. They want Australia. It's Five Eyes nation. We're allies.
Yep.
So they said, how do we actually get Australian companies into our ecosystem so we could broaden the number of options we have for our suppliers? And they've come to us a couple of times. One of them is a space traffic exercise. We haven't talked about before. It's called SACT. It's a terrible acronym, by the way, but it's a live space domain awareness war game, and Saber leads the Pacific region out of our Mission Control Center at Lot 14 in Adelaide. So kind of in the middle of the story is we won the Mission Control Center grant that the Space Agency put out a few years ago. And so our Mission Control Center in Australia is co-located with the Space Agency. As part of that, space domain awareness was part of that operations. So we brought that exercise to Australia, and it's now 200 people, 20 companies, 4 different nations. Government shows up at our Mission Control Center. We integrate them in, completely open, coalition of the willing kind of style. It's a lot of fun.
What's your day-to-day sort of role managing all of this? Or are you sort of obviously the CEO, but how do you keep across these operations? How do you find that happening? Or do you find you have to just trust teams and you have your project managers there?
Yeah, well, I've got a director for each company. That the director acts as the kind of quote internal CEO, if you want to call it. They got to keep an eye on the budgets, and they have to lead customer charges more often. I do support them directly because it's a big job, and we're only 50 people on 2 continents. So I tend to go back and forth between the mission control centers, and Australia is a little bit bigger than the US at the moment, just because of the way it's grown. But I go back and forth between Adelaide and Sydney quite frequently, and Colorado. So I do a lot of travel. But each company director manages the company. And from there, we tend to have small, what we call tiger teams for technical development. And if we've experimented, we've allowed like larger teams. If you get past 10 people, then it gets just too unruly and causes problems. We like to keep it as lean as we can.
The other one I wanted to cover off on was, well, running a space-related business is, any business is a challenge enough in the current environment. And so any observations in terms of a space business in the Australian sector now, your general feeling, is there enough being done given the strategy that Australia's on over the next decade? And then your general observations on the Australian space industry. It's going through a bit of a transformation at the moment, sort of a rediscovery. We've got some, fresh launches off in the Northern Territory. Just got delayed today, but this is all creating sort of mainstream media and public awareness of space and the space sector. Yeah, just your general feelings of running a space business in Australia, easy or just as difficult as any other business, and then your general observations of the sector and where we're at.
All business is tough. Space businesses are harder. Space business in Australia is about as hard as you can get. However, I will say that the tide has definitely turned for the better in the last few years since the Space Agency founded. I would say that the startup phase for new companies is looking pretty good. So it's I'll never say it's easy, but I compare it to what I went through and the other Saberoonies went through when we first founded in 2008. 2008 to 2014 were just traumatic, and it's amazing we were able to stay alive considering the environment we were in. But it's a lot friendlier now from a business to government standpoint. Those grants are really vital to the community. We're seeing like 30 new space companies every year in Australia. I think we're still kind of keeping to that, and maybe we're down to 15 now, but it's still a very positive pace. I think Australia needs to, as a nation, that the challenge is not the phase 1 and phase 2. We could get companies up to a couple of million, now without too much trouble. The real problem is from phase 2 to phase 3 and fielding the actual, going from that prototype MVP to something which is competitive internationally is a challenge. But to be honest, American companies have the same challenge. Your startups are constrained there because the primes are so big, and you have to work with them to get onto the acquisition channels. U.S. has gone through their own kind of pain points with that, like we are. So you separate that out and say, what's the Australian difference? Well, the difference is our space agency's specific goal, mission in life is not to go to the moon, it's to build business.
Yeah.
So businesses having their direct support, setting up these programs, setting up relationships with other government agencies that normally only bought from overseas, and CSIRO, Geosciences, Australia Defence. I would say Defence has turned around quite nicely as well. CSIRO and Geosciences are kind of on their way, but still trying to figure themselves out because the ecosystem changed for them as well. But generally, man, it's so good out here right now. I think we got another 5 years left of this growth. 5 years is what I think is what we got. So
and where do you see the differentiator for Australian technology or space businesses? Do we have any particular strengths? Where would that focus be? I know the current focus is Earth observation. We've got remote operations as well as is one. But yeah, where do you see the strengths there, or is it from a startup perspective, there is no real limit, as you say, it's getting past that initial MVP and getting to scale as well. So yeah, what are some of the key strengths?
100% the latter. Like the whole thing about and this was a mistake that I think we made as part of the expert reference group. I kind of fought against it a little bit, but not too hard. And I should have fought harder, because we listed these things that these are the things that we're going to focus on in Australia, and Earth observation and remote sensing. And these are things we were already good at.
Yeah.
And so that's why people were saying at the time, is if we want to succeed, we have to focus on our strengths. And I used to have really big fights with members of government saying, no, we need to focus on our weaknesses. Because if you're not flying, a lot of the incentives from the kind of anti-Australian lobby was, don't bother flying yourself, just buy it off the shelf. So when you say, oh, we're really good at Earth observation, then by default, that means we don't have to buy any. We could just buy that. We don't need to actually, just do some machine learning on it, a little black box machine learning. You're hypnotized. But it doesn't work, because the Americans own the satellite, or the Europeans own the satellite, which means they own the quality of the product, they own the timing of the product, and they own the distribution channel. If they don't want you, you're out.
Yeah.
Okay, and we saw that happen many times over the last 15 years. So the real benefit to Australians is that we've been so cash constrained for so long that the moment the market conditions changed, Australians started building their own companies naturally. For a while, we were one of the top producers of new startups for space in the world. We're bigger than everywhere outside of Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley was the only place that was beating us. But we're bigger than UK, Israel, all these known startup hubs for space. So it really is going to be, the future is going to be what our innovators decide they want to tackle. I think the future of space is in space logistics. So on-orbit manufacturing, fuel production, cislunar astrodynamics, space traffic control, which is Saber's kind of mojo, is kind of why we really focused on that. Australia needs to be building a lot of satellite manufacturers at the moment. We don't have much time left to do that, because our competitors own the satellites. So that's absolutely critical to what we're building.
So it sounds like you're advocating for full sovereign capability, launch and satellite building as well.
Satellite building for sure. Launch if we can do it. That's the thing. The market is tripling. It's a $420 billion market now. That's going to be 1.2 trillion by 2030. So we only got 8 years left.
Yeah.
And then the money's spent. And then we're going to hit that peak, and it'll be another 10 to 15 years before the next kind of innovation boost, because that's the cycle in space, is 15 years, and then everybody figures out their problems and sales channels settle out, and then somebody finds some disruptive thing, and then boop, up you go again. So but my concern is we've been so long drinking off of the milk from other countries, and so used to that manufacturing needs to get cracking. If we need to get crack-a-lacking on it, if we're going to really be a leader. And I think Australia can be an international leader. The responses we get from the United States, from Europe, about how quickly we've been able to go from zero to where we are now, shows that there's very strong interest and a little bit of concern in some quarter. Hey, Australia, you're gonna build your space-minded companies too. Oh shit! And I like that. Oh shit! I really like it.
Well, competition's always good, and I think it sounds like you're in the box seat. I think, given you've been around for 15 years as a business, being able to see where it's all going, what would be a key sort of takeaway or call to action, both from your business, your company perspective, but then also maybe to the industry, to the audience listening?
Well, I mean, from Saber perspective, we've got a manifest for mission operations out of the Lot 14 MCC. American companies picked those slots up before Australian companies did, and that was a concern for us. I want to see more Australians using it. The Australian scene, I would say, build your companies. If you're thinking of starting something new, if you're an academic PhD, for example, that's a prime pole position for you. Come to the Wolfpack. We'll help you. We'll teach you how to make money and get customers as fast as possible. We've set up formal relationships with our pals out in the U.S. through our U.S. company, and our customers are U.S. Space Force, and they're coming to us saying, "Bring us your Australian startups. We want to work with them. We want to set a customer channel." So get on that immediately. As far as Australia as a nation, on one side, I'll say keep up the good work in terms of what I'm seeing coming out of government for that phase 1, phase 2 realm. Keep that going. That's looking really good. Spend some focus on actual fielding on the government side. And defense knows this is a problem. They're trying to figure it out. So I'm not going to bag them out because I know they're working on it. But I want to see CSIRO and Geosciences Australia be customers for the Australian ecosystem as well. And that's, I think, what we need to focus on next.
Very good. Well, happy celebrations for your 15 years. It is a milestone as well. And for the audience, it's saberastro.com. So you can go check that out. And I like the website too, and the way it builds around. So well done on that. So Jason, I look forward to catching up again in Sydney. Jason Held, CEO with Saber Astronautics. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Take care, everybody. All the best.
Appreciate it.